With markup of U.S. climate legislation set for this morning, world climate talks continue in Barcelona. Clean Skies News is there covering this week's round of talks, the last chance for progress before world climate negotiations in Copenhagen next month. While hopes have been fading for a binding deal out of Denmark, many still believe this week of bargaining in Spain can bring world leaders closer to a climate treaty they can sign in Copenhagen. Clean Skies executive editor Margaret Ryan reports from the talks, where she says there is both optimism and urgency.
The clock is ticking. Everywhere you turn at the UN climate talks that opened in Barcelona, there are reminders. Only 34 days left till world leaders gather in Copenhagen to finalize the next world treaty to combat global warming. And the world is watching. The conference has 50,000 followers on Facebook alone, and it's growing. Top officials addressing the opening plenary tried to stoke that sense of urgency. Listen to Connie Hedegaard, the Danish Environment Minister.
Some ask, why Copenhagen? Why not wait? I answer, because the world can wait no longer. I know that striking a deal is not easy, but do any of you believe it's going to be any easier next spring, next year, or the year after? You know it's not going to be any easier.
But with the largest decisions still outstanding, like who will cut emissions and how much wealthy nations will aid poorer ones, can it be done? Climate advocates and top officials say yes, Barcelona can narrow the options and frame them for final decisions next month.
We have had a very long text in the last few months. We've narrowed it down in all of the subsequent meetings. This process, this UN Framework Convention on Climate Change process, its goal really is to provide those options and provide that text. And it's moving in that direction in a lot of the less contentious areas. And in the more contentious areas, we just need ministers to know and heads of state, presidents and prime ministers to understand what the options are so that they can make a decision and we can get a deal in the next 34 days.
In Bali 2 years ago, these governments committed to achieving a legally binding deal in Copenhagen, and we're here to hold them to their commitments. And I believe that as long as enough people get this message out, as long as the mandate is clear enough, there is still potential for that deal.
I sense a huge desire for these negotiations to succeed.
At every press conference today, one question was raised again and again. What will the U.S. do? Multiple speakers indicated the U.S. negotiators are waiting on congressional action to table a firm carbon-cutting offer. Reporters kept posing the corollary question, can an international deal be reached without U.S. commitments to firm carbon cuts and firm international aid?
No, I do not think that the international community will accept an instrument that lacks clarity on what the United States will do to reduce its emissions. I think that that is an essential component of the puzzle.
And De Boer added, no one can say they are waiting for China to act because China already is acting.
Developing countries, including China, India, Brazil, Mexico, South Africa, Korea, have either come already with very ambitious plans or are developing ambitious plans, or are building on their current plans. I would even go so far as to say that today, already, China is probably the world leader in terms of limiting greenhouse gas emissions.
U.S. Chief Negotiator Jonathan Pershing insisted the U.S. is committed to achieving an international deal, but is working with the Senate to ensure any deal can be ratified. He was asked what would happen if the Senate doesn't act before Copenhagen.
We fortunately have another month, and there's an enormous amount of work to be done in that month in not just the United States, but around the world. In the United States, we will be continuing to work actively with Congress. They are moving much more quickly than they had been even a few weeks ago. We think we will have the kind of information that we need to move forward, and we're working under that process.
Now, delegates split into smaller meetings where the fine points of a draft treaty are being hashed out, trying to narrow the questions facing world leaders next month, with one less day left on the road to Copenhagen. In Barcelona, I'm Margaret Ryan, Clean Skies News.
And Clean Skies will be reporting from Barcelona all week long for this final round of talks before the negotiations in Copenhagen.